I still remember the night I found out like it was carved into my bones. The smell of burnt coffee, the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the wall clock that suddenly felt louder than my heartbeat. It was late, sometime after midnight, when I finally realized that the woman I had loved for nearly a decade wasn't the person I thought she was. But before I dive into that moment, I need to go back a little to when everything still looked perfect on the outside. My name's Ethan Miller, and for most of my 30s, I thought I had life figured out. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, the kind of place where people still wave to their neighbors and the weather can't decide what it wants to be. My dad was a construction foreman, my mom a nurse, and they raised me with this old-school belief that if you work hard, stay honest, and treat people right, good things eventually circle back to you. For a long time, I believed that with my whole heart. By the time I hit 33, I had a decent job as a project manager at a small architecture firm downtown. I wasn't rich, but I paid my bills, had a decent house in the suburbs, and a beautiful wife, Laura. She was the kind of woman who could make an ordinary day feel cinematic. We met in 2014 at a local art gallery. I was there with a friend who was showing his photography, and she was standing by one of the pieces, a black and white shot of the city skyline in winter. She said she liked how lonely it looked, how honest it felt. I remember laughing because that's exactly how I saw it too. We hit it off instantly. Laura was smart, warm, full of energy. She worked as a social media consultant, which meant she could work from home, and she always seemed to have this rhythm to her days. Morning coffee with her laptop, soft music playing in the background, the sound of her typing mixing with the hum of the espresso machine. Life with her felt easy. The first few years were everything I thought marriage was supposed to be. We traveled when we could, Boston, Chicago, one unforgettable trip to Italy for our anniversary in 2018. We had friends over on weekends, movie nights, little inside jokes that made us feel like we were in our own private world. I still remember how she'd leave me tiny notes in my lunch bag. You got this. Babe, or can't wait for tonight. But looking back now, I realize how much can hide behind the word normal. The first red flag came during the pandemic in 2020. I know that was a weird time for everyone. People were either growing closer or falling apart. For us, it was subtle. At first, it felt like we were just adjusting to being around each other all the time. But then, she started spending more hours locked in the guest room, calling it her office. She'd say she was working with clients overseas, different time zones, and all that. I didn't question it much because I wanted to trust her. And honestly, I was trying to deal with my own stress, remote projects, company layoffs, all that uncertainty. There were moments, though, when something inside me whispered that things weren't right. Like the night she got a text around midnight and her phone screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize. Aaron. When I casually asked who it was, she said he was a client from LA needing help with a campaign. I wanted to believe her, and I did, mostly because I couldn't imagine her lying. But once you notice one odd thing, you start noticing all of them. She started dressing up for her video calls more than usual. Makeup, perfume, even earrings. She'd close the door completely, something she never used to do. And her laugh, it was different. Louder, almost like she was performing. I told myself I was overthinking, that couples go through phases, that maybe I was just jealous because my own life felt stuck. By 2022, things seemed better again. We'd gone on a small weekend trip to Nashville, and I remember thinking how happy she looked. She even said she wanted to reconnect. She suggested we start a home renovation project together, painting the kitchen and redoing the backyard. It felt like a sign that maybe we were finding our way back. I let my guard down completely. But then came June 17th, 2023, the day that split my life into before and after. That morning, Laura said she was heading into the city for a networking brunch. She dressed sharp, a white blazer, her hair tied neatly, those black heels she wore only for special occasions. She smelled like the perfume I'd gotten her for Christmas, and she kissed me on the cheek before leaving. I remember joking, "Don't go networking your way into a new husband," and she laughed. Too hard, in hindsight. The day went by normally. I did some yard work, grabbed a burger from a local diner, watched an old Browns game rerun. Around 4 p.m., I texted her just to check in. "How's brunch?" She didn't reply. Not unusual, she could be busy. But by 6:30, still nothing. I started feeling uneasy, that kind of low hum of anxiety that grows louder the more you try to ignore it. I called her once. No answer. Called again. Straight to voicemail. At around 8 p.m., she texted me back, "Sorry, babe, busy day. Heading home soon?" I should have felt relieved, but something about the felt mechanical. Like it was meant to reassure, not express. And then it happened. While cleaning the kitchen counter, I accidentally knocked her iPad off the shelf. It lit up as it fell, and a notification flashed across the screen, a preview of a message from Aaron. It read, "Last night was perfect. Same place next week?" My chest tightened. The world went silent. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, staring at the glowing screen like it was some kind of weapon. Every instinct in me screamed to look, to find out, to know. And yet there was this tiny, dying part of me that prayed it was innocent. Maybe he was a coworker. Maybe it was just bad phrasing, but deep down I knew. My hands were shaking when I opened the iPad. The chat history was still there, messages going back months. I read every single one. The compliments. The inside jokes. The hotel bookings. The selfies. My wife, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled with me in years. My wife writing things like, "You make me feel alive again." I remember sinking onto the floor, clutching the iPad like it could somehow give me answers. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally looked up, the sun had gone down completely. When Laura came home that night, I couldn't even look at her. She walked in humming, asked how my day was, kissed me on the forehead. I wanted to scream. To ask why. To throw that damn iPad at her feet. But instead I just nodded and said, "It was fine. I went to bed early." She joined me an hour later, scrolling through her phone, smiling faintly at whatever she was looking at. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the distance between us like an open wound. That night, I didn't sleep. I just kept replaying our life together, our wedding in that small church by Lake Erie, the honeymoon in Maui, her tears when we adopted our dog, Bailey. Every memory felt like it was dissolving in front of me. In the morning, I made her coffee like I always did. She thanked me, kissed me on the cheek, and said she had another client meeting downtown, and that's when something inside me shifted. The Ethan from the day before, the trusting, forgiving husband, died quietly that morning. What replaced him wasn't angry, not yet. It was something colder, focused. A voice in my head whispered, "She thinks you don't know." And that's when I decided, if she thought I was blind, I'd give her a performance she'd never forget. The plan didn't come overnight. For the first few weeks, I acted normal, maybe too normal. I laughed at her jokes, brought her flowers, asked about her work. All the while, I was digging quietly in the background. Checking credit card statements, location history, email receipts. She was careful, I'll give her that, but not careful enough. By mid-July, I had everything. Hotel names, dates, even a photo she'd sent him, wearing a dress I'd bought her for our anniversary. But revenge isn't just about exposing someone. It's about making them feel what they made you feel, helpless, confused, small. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that silence can be far louder than confrontation. I wanted her to see what it feels like to lose control without even realizing it. So I began constructing my plan piece by piece, like an architect drawing up the blueprint of a new building. Every move would be deliberate, every reaction rehearsed. And by the time she realized what I'd done, it would already be too late. At first, it was small things. I started acting distant, not cold, just detached enough for her to notice. She'd ask, "Is everything okay?" And I'd smile and say, "Of course." I started working late, keeping my phone close. I watched her eyes flicker with confusion, the same confusion I'd felt that night with the iPad in my hands. Then came the bigger steps. I began documenting everything, screenshots, texts, receipts. I opened a separate bank account, started moving money quietly. I spoke to a lawyer, pretending I was asking for advice for a friend. And I started reaching out to her friends, casually dropping hints that Laura and I were taking some time apart. Watching rumors spread was almost poetic, but there was one piece missing, the part that would truly leave her speechless. The one thing that would make her feel what I felt, betrayal in the purest form, and that's when it hit me. Our 10th wedding anniversary was coming up in September. She'd been talking about planning something special for months, a small gathering with friends, maybe a trip. I knew she'd be expecting a celebration, a perfect moment to show the world how happy we supposedly were. Instead, I decided it would be the day everything unraveled, not in anger, Not in chaos, but in silence, controlled, precise. I wanted to create a moment she'd never be, able to forget. And as that idea started taking shape in my mind, I remember standing in front of the mirror one morning, looking at my own reflection, tired eyes, 3-day stubble, a faint, humorless smile, and thinking, "You're not the same man anymore, Ethan." No, I wasn't. I was something else now. Something sharper, and Laura had no idea what was coming. The weeks leading up to our anniversary felt like a slow-motion car crash. Everything seemed normal to her, maybe even better than normal. She'd hum while making breakfast, wear my shirts around the house, tell me she loved me before heading out. And the scary thing was, she probably believed it. People always talk about cheaters like they're villains, but what I learned is that they can still look you in the eye and feel absolutely fine about what they're doing. They compartmentalize, build a neat little emotional wall, and live 2 lives side by side, and I played right into it. By August, my performance was flawless. I smiled when I was supposed to, nodded when she spoke, and even planned anniversary surprises she wouldn't shut up about. I'd booked a dinner at her favorite restaurant downtown, the Willow Room, and she was ecstatic. She spent hours picking out dresses online, talking about how she couldn't wait to celebrate 10 years of love. Every word out of her mouth felt like a blade dragging across my skin, but I just smiled. Because I knew that the dinner wasn't the celebration she thought it would be. I spent those weeks laying the groundwork. I transferred ownership of a few joint assets quietly, the car, some savings. I backed up every piece of evidence on multiple drives and sent one to my lawyer, sealed and dated. I was calm, meticulous, but beneath it all, I was a storm waiting for the right moment to break. The thing about revenge is, it's not the act itself that's satisfying, it's the control. When you've been blindsided by betrayal, you crave that feeling of being in charge again, and for the first time in months, I felt it. Then one night, about 2 weeks before the anniversary, something unexpected happened. I came home late from work, or at least, that's what I told her. In truth, I'd parked 2 blocks away and waited outside for nearly an hour. I wanted to see what she did when she thought I wasn't around. And sure enough, around 8:45, a black BMW pulled up right in front of the house. I watched her step outside, wearing that same white blazer from the networking brunch. She smiled. That warm, familiar smile I used to think was mine, and got into the passenger seat. They drove off, and I followed, carefully a few cars behind. I'd never done anything like this before. My palms were slick with sweat, my chest tight. Every red light felt like it lasted an eternity. They finally stopped at a boutique hotel near the waterfront, one of those places people go for staycations. I parked across the street, engine off, lights out. She leaned over and kissed him. Not a quick one. A slow, intimate kiss. The kind that said we've done this before. I remember gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just shut down. It was like my mind detached from my body. Watching her disappear inside that building felt like watching the last piece of my life walk out of reach. I sat there for nearly an hour, just staring. The city lights reflected on the windshield, the faint sound of waves from the lake nearby. I thought about every promise we'd made. Every night I'd stayed up comforting her when she was anxious. Every small act of love that apparently meant nothing. When she came back out, it was close to midnight. She looked relaxed. Radiant, even. She kissed him again before walking to an Uber that pulled up nearby. I let her go. I didn't confront her, didn't follow her home. I just sat there, the faint hum of the car engine filling the silence, and made a decision that would define everything that came after. If she could live 2 lives, so could I. From that night forward, my love for her didn't die. It calcified into something cold and deliberate. I stopped feeling hurt. I stopped feeling anything except purpose. The next day, she greeted me with her usual cheerful, "Morning, babe," and asked how work was going. I told her it was fine. Then she mentioned her upcoming business trip to Chicago, which she'd been planning for weeks. Supposedly, she was meeting with a new client about a long-term marketing contract. I nodded and said, "That's great. You deserve a little getaway." She smiled, completely unaware that I already knew Aaron lived in Chicago. I spent that weekend preparing for what would happen next. My plan had evolved beyond simple exposure. I wanted her to feel the collapse from the inside out, to realize too late that the world she'd built on lies was crumbling beneath her. So I began with the foundation: perception. I crafted a series of subtle posts on social media, nothing overt, just enough to plant seeds. Pictures of me at work events with colleagues, captions about new beginnings and closing chapters. I even reconnected with an old friend from college, Jessica, who happened to be a photographer. We met for coffee, and I asked if she'd mind helping me with a small favor. She didn't need the details. She just took a few professional photos of me looking happy, relaxed, successful. I posted one with a caption: "Sometimes change isn't scary. Sometimes it's overdue." Within days, Laura's friends started noticing. She mentioned that one of them had texted her asking if we were okay. She laughed it off, saying, "People overanalyze everything online." But I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. A week later, the day of her Chicago trip arrived. I helped her pack, kissed her goodbye at the door, and watched her drive away. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, I started phase 2. I called the hotel she'd booked under her own name, a rookie mistake, and confirmed her check-in. Then I printed everything. Every text, every booking receipt, every timestamp that lined up perfectly with her lies. I slipped them all into an envelope marked with her name and left it with my lawyer, along with divorce papers ready to be filed the moment I gave the word. But that wasn't all. I also scheduled a delivery for our anniversary, a custom-made photo book. On the surface, it looked like a gift. 10 years of us. But inside, each page told the story of our marriage from my perspective. Photos of us smiling, followed by printed screenshots of her messages with Aaron, carefully matched to the same dates as the pictures. A timeline of love and betrayal intertwined, and on the last page I wrote, "You thought I didn't know. But I've known for months. This was your anniversary gift, the truth." The book would arrive at our dinner table that night, hand-delivered. While she was in Chicago, I didn't contact her much. Just the occasional "hope the trip's going well" text, nothing suspicious. She sent me pictures from the hotel lobby, pretending it was a conference center. I played along. By then, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just waiting for the curtain to fall. She returned home 2 days before our anniversary, glowing. She brought me a small souvenir, a keychain shaped like the Chicago skyline, and told me how productive her meetings were. I smiled, thanked her, kissed her on the forehead. Inside, I was counting down the hours. September 14th, 2023. Our 10th anniversary. I woke up early, made her breakfast in bed. Pancakes, strawberries, her favorite vanilla latte. She was thrilled, posting a story on Instagram with the caption, "10 years of love." Every like, every comment from friends wishing us well made me want to laugh. The irony was so thick it was almost poetic. We spent the day like a picture-perfect couple. Walked Bailey in the park, watched a movie, exchanged small gifts. I gave her a silver bracelet engraved with our wedding date. She looked genuinely touched, tears in her eyes. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Evening came, and we drove to the Willow Room. The restaurant was beautiful. Dim lights, live piano music, tables set with white linens. She wore a deep red dress that I hadn't seen in years. And for a moment sitting across from her, I almost forgot everything. But then she smiled. Said she'd never been happier, and I remembered. At 8:15, a man in a suit walked in, holding a small gift-wrapped box. He approached our table and said, "Delivery for Mrs. Miller." She looked surprised, then delighted. "Oh my God, did you do this?" I smiled. "Go ahead. Open it." Inside was the photo book. She flipped open the cover, expecting romance. Her face changed almost instantly. Confusion, disbelief, then horror. She turned each page slowly, her breathing getting sharper with every one. When she reached the final page, she froze. The color drained from her face. Her hands trembled. I leaned back in my chair, calm. The piano music continued softly in the background, a cruel soundtrack to her unraveling. She whispered, "Ethan, what is this?" I looked her straight in the eyes and said quietly, "It's our story. The real one." For the first time in months, she had no words. She stood up suddenly, knocking her chair back. People were staring. She muttered something like, "I can explain," but her voice broke halfway through. I didn't respond. I just watched. She stumbled out of the restaurant, tears streaking her face, clutching that photo book like it might somehow save her. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. That was the breaking point, not just for her, but for me too. Because as much satisfaction as it brought me, sitting there alone afterward, I felt something hollow underneath it all. Revenge doesn't heal you. It just fills the silence for a while. When I got home that night, her car was gone. So were a few of her clothes. She hadn't even taken her toothbrush. The next morning, her mother called. Laura had shown up at her parents' house, hysterical, saying I'd destroyed her life. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. I simply said she did that herself. Then I hung up and went for a walk by the lake. The sun was rising, the water perfectly still. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Not happy, not peaceful, just unchained. But as I'd learn in the weeks to come, the fallout was far from over. Because when you take control of a lie, you don't just end the story, you start a new one. And mine was only beginning. The morning after the anniversary felt like the aftermath of a storm, the kind where the sky is too quiet, the air too still, and everything you once recognized looks slightly different. The bed was empty beside me, the faint imprint of her body still pressed into the sheets. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the space where she used to sleep, trying to convince myself that the silence meant freedom and not loss. When I finally got up, the house felt hollow in a way I hadn't expected. Her hairbrush still sat on the dresser, strands of blonde tangled in the bristles. Her perfume lingered faintly in the hallway, ghostly and out of place. The mug she always used, the one with "but first coffee" printed in faded letters, sat by the sink, half-rinsed, forgotten. It hit me then, the strange irony of it all. I'd spent months planning this, orchestrating her downfall, preparing every piece of the puzzle so I could regain control. And yet when it was over, I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. People assume that catching someone cheating and getting revenge brings closure, that once the truth is out, you can move on. But it doesn't work that way. The anger leaves a void behind, and that void echoes louder than the betrayal ever did. That day, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old photos, our first Christmas together, her laughing at the beach in Florida, us holding Bailey when he was just a puppy. Every image felt like evidence from another life. I wondered if she ever truly loved me, or if our whole marriage had just been a long, comfortable lie. By noon, my phone started buzzing. Texts, missed calls, notifications piling up like static. Word had spread fast. Laura's best friend, Erica, had posted something cryptic on Instagram. Betrayal cuts both ways. People started commenting, speculating. Friends texted me privately, asking if it was true, if we'd really split. I ignored most of them. Then came the call from Laura. I didn't answer at first. She left a voicemail, her voice raw, shaking. She said she was sorry, that she never meant for things to go this far, that she was confused. That word, confused, made me laugh bitterly. How does one get confused into a months-long affair? I saved the voicemail but didn't reply. For the next few days, my life turned into something between relief and numb routine. I'd go to work, come home, take Bailey for walks along the lake. I'd sit on a park bench, watching people go by. Couples holding hands, kids feeding ducks, joggers passing with headphones in, and I'd wonder how many of them were pretending too. It's strange how betrayal changes your perception of people. You start seeing cracks everywhere. You start questioning the sincerity of smiles, the honesty of words. A week later, my lawyer called. Laura had contacted hers. She wasn't contesting the divorce. She just wanted it done quietly. That surprised me. I'd expected more fight, more drama, but maybe the reality had hit her hard enough already. Still, I wasn't prepared for the backlash that followed. 2 days later, I got a call from our mutual friend, Tom. He sounded awkward, hesitant. "Look, man, I just wanted to give you a heads up. Laura's been saying some stuff. Apparently, she was telling people I'd emotionally manipulated her, that the anniversary stunt had been cruel and humiliating. Some even believed her. A few mutual friends stopped replying to my messages. People who'd congratulated us on our anniversary days before were now posting vague sympathy posts about toxic relationships. It was almost funny. The same woman who'd lied for months was now trying to rewrite the ending of our story. At first, I was angry. I wanted to defend myself, send the screenshots to everyone, make them see the truth. But then I realized I didn't need to. The people who mattered already knew, and the rest didn't deserve the energy. Still, the emotional weight lingered. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake replaying everything. The way she looked at me that last night at the restaurant. The way her face changed when she saw that final page. The image haunted me. Not because I pitied her, but because it marked the end of something I could never get back. Not the marriage, but the version of myself that still believed love was simple. I started therapy around that time. My sister Hannah had insisted. "You can't just bury this," she'd said. She was right. My therapist, Dr. Patel, was this calm, soft-spoken man in his 50s who asked more questions than he answered. The first session, he asked me one that stuck with me. "Did you plan your revenge to punish her, or to make yourself feel seen?" I didn't know how to respond. Maybe it was both. Maybe I just wanted her to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. To see me not as the naive husband, but as the man who finally took control. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how little satisfaction there was in being right when the person you loved was already gone. By October, the divorce papers were finalized. Quick, clean, clinical, 10 years reduced to a few signed pages. She moved into a small apartment near downtown. I kept the house. Bailey stayed with me, the one constant that hadn't betrayed me. For a while, I thought I'd move on easily. I started going to the gym again, met friends for drinks, even downloaded a dating app, though I deleted it within a week. Every time I matched with someone, I'd think about how easily trust could be broken. One night, I was out with Tom and a few old college friends. We were sitting in a noisy bar, neon lights flickering off the beer glasses, when Tom leaned over and said quietly, "She's with him, you know." That guy, Aaron. It shouldn't have affected me, not after everything, but it did. Hearing it out loud made it real. I just nodded, pretending not to care, but inside there was a strange ache. Not jealousy exactly, more like a reminder that she'd moved on while I was still picking up the pieces. That night, when I got home, I sat on the couch staring at the empty spot beside me and thought about how people can become strangers so fast. Just months ago, we were planning vacations, talking about maybe adopting another dog. Now, she was probably lying in someone else's arms, laughing at the same jokes that used to be mine. But as much as that thought stung, another part of me, the colder, calmer part, felt vindicated. Let her live with the weight of what she'd done. Let her look at him every day and remember that he was the reason her world fell apart. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild. Slowly, deliberately. I threw myself into work, took on new projects, started volunteering on weekends. I even picked up photography again, something I hadn't done since before I met Laura. It gave me a sense of perspective, a reminder that beauty still existed, even in broken places. But the truth is, healing isn't a straight line. There were days I'd wake up feeling fine, almost normal, and then suddenly get hit by a wave of memory so strong it left me breathless. Like catching a glimpse of her favorite coffee brand at the grocery store or hearing a song she used to hum while cooking. Those little ghosts followed me everywhere. Then, in early December, something unexpected happened. I got a letter. It wasn't a text or an email, an actual handwritten letter delivered to my mailbox. The handwriting was instantly familiar. It was from Laura. I stood at the kitchen counter for nearly an hour before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, the same one that used to linger on my shirts. The letter wasn't long. Just a few paragraphs. She said she didn't expect forgiveness, that she knew she'd destroyed everything good between us. She admitted that what she'd felt with Aaron wasn't love. It was validation, attention she thought she'd lost. She wrote that she'd never hated herself more than she did that night at the restaurant. That she'd replayed it over and over in her head. Her final line read, "You showed me who I really was, and I'll never forgive myself for it." I read it twice, folded it neatly, and placed it back in the envelope. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or pity, just a deep, quiet sadness. because in some strange, twisted way, I realized we were both victims of the same thing. Unmet needs, unspoken resentments, silent distance that grew too wide to bridge. I didn't write back. Some things don't need closure through words. Christmas came and went quietly that year. I spent it with Hannah and her kids, watching them tear through wrapping paper, their laughter echoing through the house. It reminded me that life moves on, that even after the worst heartbreak, the world keeps spinning, uncaring, unstoppable. By January, I'd stopped checking her social media. I stopped replaying our past in my head. I even took down our wedding photo from the hallway, not out of bitterness, but acceptance. It had been 6 months since the night everything fell apart, and slowly I could feel the fog lifting. I wasn't the same person anymore. I was quieter, more cautious, maybe even colder, but also stronger. People sometimes ask if I regret what I did, the public exposure, the dramatic reveal. And honestly, I don't. She needed to see the truth, and I needed to reclaim mine. But if I could change one thing, it would be this. I'd have walked away the moment I found out, without the theatrics, without the revenge, just walked away. Because peace isn't something you win by breaking someone else. It's something you build by letting go. Still, life has a funny way of circling back. In February, almost 8 months after the breakup, I ran into her again, at a cafe downtown. It was snowing lightly outside, the kind of soft, quiet snowfall that muffles everything. She was sitting alone by the window, staring out at the street. For a moment, I almost turned around and left. But she saw me before I could, our eyes met. She gave a small, tentative smile. I walked over, nodded, and said hello. Her voice trembled slightly when she said my name. We talked for a few minutes, polite, surface-level conversation. She mentioned she'd left Aaron months ago, that she was trying to figure things out. I told her I was doing better, and it was true. When I stood to leave, she said quietly, "You deserved better, Ethan." I nodded and said, "Yeah, I think we both did, and that was it." No dramatic ending, no lingering glances. Just two people who had once shared a life, now reduced to strangers with history. But as I walked back to my car, snow crunching beneath my boots, I realized something important. The revenge, the anger, the heartbreak, none of it defined me anymore. What defined me was the fact that I survived it. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. After that winter encounter with Laura, I thought my life might settle into a quieter rhythm, but I quickly realized that healing doesn't happen in neat lines. Recovery is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes it demands action, not just reflection. I couldn't just sit back and let life carry me forward. I needed to take control, not out of revenge anymore, but to reclaim my sense of self, my confidence, my direction. It started with work. By February, the firm I'd been at for almost a decade was offering me a promotion to lead a high-profile commercial project downtown. Normally, I'd have hesitated, worried about the added responsibility. But something in me had shifted. The months of betrayal, heartbreak, and quiet anger had honed my focus. I said yes without hesitation. I poured myself into meetings, blueprints, late-night calculations, client negotiations. I became almost obsessive about detail. Every steel beam, every environmental assessment, every budget line item had to be perfect. It wasn't just work. It was my way of proving to myself that I could still build something, even if my personal life had been torn apart. Alongside work, I started reclaiming my social life. I'd spent months isolating myself, thinking solitude would heal me, but all it did was amplify my thoughts. Slowly, I began reconnecting with old friends, some from college, some from work. I met Jessica, the photographer, again, not for collaboration, but just for coffee. She laughed at some of my old jokes, the kind Laura never seemed to find funny anymore. Her laughter wasn't performative. It was genuine. It reminded me what it felt like to be around someone who was honest in their presence, not just in words. Spring came early that year, the kind of March that felt warmer than it had any right to be. I started running again along the lakefront, feeling the wind whip across my face and realizing that physical endurance mirrored emotional endurance. The harder I pushed, the freer I felt. My mind, which had been cluttered with betrayal and heartbreak, started clearing. But the real turning point came in late April. I was walking past one of the high-end cafes downtown when I noticed a "Help Wanted" sign in the window of a small, struggling bookstore tucked between two massive chain coffee shops. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. My life was busy enough. But something about that faded red sign drew me in. I stepped inside. The smell of old books, a mix of must and dust, hit me instantly. The owner, an older man named Mr. Carmichael, looked up from behind the counter and smiled. There was something kind about his face, something familiar. He reminded me of my grandfather, who used to run a small hardware store back in Cleveland. We talked for nearly an hour, and I realized he needed more than just someone to restock shelves. He needed someone who could breathe life back into his store. I agreed to help. Part-time at first, alongside my work at the architecture firm. That decision changed everything. I started introducing small events, poetry readings, local author signings, and even a monthly photography night where Jessica came and showcased her work. Slowly, the bookstore began to attract a steady crowd. The energy was intoxicating. I watched people connect over books and stories, and I realized that creating a space where honesty, creativity, and warmth thrived was profoundly healing. I had taken my heartbreak and turned it into something constructive. Meanwhile, Laura's presence in my life had faded, but news still trickled in through mutual friends. She had tried to rebuild her career after the scandal with Aaron. Freelance campaigns, short-term contracts, a few appearances at social media conferences. But I heard whispers that clients weren't entirely comfortable working with her, that she had lost the trust she once took for granted. I didn't feel joy at that news, only a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences, and this time, she would face them without the shield of my patience or understanding. The turning point came when I met Sophie, a young woman who volunteered at the bookstore. She was energetic, clever, and had this quiet determination about her that reminded me of my younger self. At first, our connection was purely professional. I taught her how to organize events, introduce authors, and handle the logistics of running a small business. But over time, our conversations extended beyond books and schedules. We talked about our families, our ambitions, and the mistakes we'd made that had shaped who we were. For the first time in years, I felt seen again, not in a way that reminded me of Laura, not as a reflection of past love, but as someone who could be fully myself. Sophie's presence didn't erase the past. It simply coexisted with it, a reminder that life continues and that new beginnings are possible. During this period, I also took steps to protect myself legally and financially. I consolidated my savings, invested in a few small projects, and ensured that I had a safety net independent of anyone else. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. Writing became a ritual, a way to process the residual anger and the lessons I had learned. Some entries were dark, almost vengeful in tone, but others were lighter, reflective, even hopeful. Over time, I noticed a shift. My words began to reflect growth, not just survival. One afternoon in May, while rearranging books for an upcoming event, I found a photo tucked behind a shelf. It was Laura and me at a wedding we had attended years ago. We were laughing, genuinely happy. My first instinct was to throw it away, but instead I held it in my hands and felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for her, not for the marriage, but for the experiences we shared, the lessons learned, and the resilience I had discovered within myself. That summer, the bookstore flourished. The events attracted writers from across the city. Local schools started sending students for reading sessions, and even some small media coverage highlighted our efforts to revive the struggling store. I began to understand that my revenge against Laura had been only a chapter of my story. The real transformation happened when I shifted my energy from punishing her to building something meaningful for myself and others. At the same time, I faced moral conflicts. I knew that some people still judged me for the way I handled the anniversary reveal, and a part of me wondered if I had let revenge linger too long, if I had allowed myself to become defined by her betrayal. Some nights I'd lie awake thinking about the fine line between justice and cruelty, between reclaiming dignity and feeding ego. These reflections were uncomfortable but necessary. I began to see that true empowerment doesn't come from proving someone wrong. It comes from proving yourself right, by living authentically with integrity. By August, nearly a year after the anniversary, I had fully immersed myself in the new rhythm of life. Work, the bookstore, photography, running, Sophie, each part reinforced the others. I no longer felt haunted by Laura's betrayal. Instead, I felt energized by the possibilities that lay ahead. And then, In early September, something happened that crystallized everything I had worked toward. The bookstore received an invitation to participate in a citywide literary festival. It was a big deal. Local papers, radio interviews, social media coverage. I realized that through this small venture, I had created not just a business, but a community. People came to the store not to gossip or judge, but to engage, learn, and connect. I saw families, teenagers, and elderly readers all sharing the same space, all appreciating something I had helped build from scratch. The sense of accomplishment was intoxicating. Sophie, of course, was there for every step of this journey. She had grown confident, assertive, and passionate about her role. I watched her interact with people and felt a rare kind of pride, the kind that isn't about being admired, but about witnessing someone else flourish. It was during one of these festival preparation days that I had an unexpected encounter. Laura walked into the store. She looked different, older, tired, careful. She tried to blend in, but I noticed her immediately. She hesitated near the entrance, watching the activity, perhaps realizing that the life she once dominated was no longer hers to control. I approached her, calm, measured. There was no anger, no desire to humiliate, just quiet observation. She spoke first, almost whispering, I didn't expect to see this, I nodded. You mean the store? She nodded. Yeah, you've really rebuilt everything, I smiled faintly. It's not about rebuilding. It's about moving forward. For a few moments, we just stood there. No past arguments, no recrimination, just a quiet acknowledgement of what had happened and what had changed. She finally said, I'm sorry, Ethan, truly. I nodded again. I know, and I've moved on. That interaction, brief and uneventful on the surface, felt monumental. I realized that turning the tables wasn't about revenge or exposure anymore. It was about creating a life so full, so grounded in purpose, that betrayal no longer had power over me. In the weeks following that encounter, I made a conscious effort to let go completely. I focused on deepening my connections with people who valued honesty, integrity, and genuine human connection. I mentored younger architects at work, guided new volunteers at the bookstore, and began to explore my own creative projects more seriously. By the end of the year, I was no longer the man who had been blindsided and consumed by anger. I was someone who had faced immense betrayal, acknowledged the pain, and transformed it into action, growth, and empowerment. And in that transformation, I found something unexpected. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from erasing the past, but the kind that comes from owning it, learning from it, and refusing to be defined by someone else's choices. Looking back, I realized that the perfect revenge, the kind I had once imagined, wasn't about the drama at the restaurant, the photo book, or the confrontation. It was about reclaiming my life, building something meaningful, and proving to myself that betrayal could not break me. By the time winter rolled around again, almost 2 years after the anniversary incident, I felt like I had emerged from a storm that could have easily destroyed me. The chaos, the heartbreak, the anger, it all existed, yes, but it no longer dictated my life. What dictated my life now was choice. Every morning, every decision was mine to make, unclouded by betrayal or resentment. The bookstore had become more than a project. It was a sanctuary. On weekdays, I managed events, handled inventory, and trained volunteers. On weekends, I hosted book clubs and storytelling sessions. There were familiar faces now, regulars who would come in just to sit, read, and chat over coffee. Sophie had become indispensable, not just to the operations, but to the community we were building. Her energy had a way of spreading, inspiring people to participate, to connect, to care. One evening, just before Christmas, I stayed late at the store, sorting through new arrivals. The light outside was fading, the streets quiet, the snow beginning to settle on the window ledge. I found myself reflecting on the last 2 years. Every sleepless night, every bitter thought, every painstaking plan for revenge, and every moment of hesitant healing. I thought about Laura. Not often, but enough to know that her absence was no longer painful. The rage that had consumed me after the restaurant incident had been replaced by clarity. Revenge had its moment. It had allowed me to reclaim control, to assert my boundaries. But the true victory, I realized, was not in punishment. It was in the quiet reclaiming of self, the building of life that was mine, untainted by her choices. In early January, the bookstore received recognition from the city's cultural board. They called it a revival of literary community and highlighted our programs for young readers and aspiring authors. That recognition wasn't about ego. It was about proof. Proof that meaningful effort and integrity could create something lasting. For the first time, I felt that same validation Laura had sought from Aaron, except this one was earned, not stolen. And then came Sophie's unexpected confession. One Friday evening, after we'd finished rearranging the poetry section, she stayed behind to help me tidy up. She said quietly, "You've changed everything here, including me. I feel more confident, more myself when I'm around you." I smiled, trying to brush it off, but she continued, her voice steady but soft. "I mean, I've never met someone who could endure what you did and come out like this. I admire that." Her words struck a chord, not in a romantic sense, not yet at least, but in a recognition that my transformation, my resilience was tangible. It wasn't just personal growth, it was contagious. People around me were learning how to trust again, how to find purpose again, simply by seeing me move forward with integrity. The snow deepened outside, and I realized I was happy in a way I hadn't imagined possible after Laura. Happiness that wasn't dependent on someone else's validation, attention, or approval. Happiness that came from within, from knowing I could withstand betrayal, heartbreak, and disappointment, and still build something beautiful. Then, one afternoon in February, I got a call from a national literary magazine. They wanted to feature the bookstore in a full-page spread, highlighting not only its events but also its community impact. The piece would include interviews, photos, and an exploration of our journey from a struggling little store to a citywide hub of creativity. I thought about Laura, about how she had assumed she could control the narrative of our lives. And I smiled. Not out of malice, but because life had written the story in a way she never could. Her chapter had ended long ago. Mine was flourishing. The piece ran in early March. I kept a copy framed in the store office. Every time I glanced at it, it reminded me of one simple truth. True empowerment comes from creation, not destruction. From building, not tearing down. From moving forward, not looking backward. By late spring, Sophie and I grew closer. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of connection that forms when two people respect each other's pasts and appreciate the present. We shared small moments, morning coffees, long walks along the lake, discussions about literature and photography. There was laughter, warmth, and a sense of companionship that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. I started thinking about love again, cautiously. Not the naive, blind trust of my marriage to Laura, but something more grounded. Something that acknowledged imperfection while celebrating effort. Sophie didn't erase my past. She complemented the new life I was building. One evening, we hosted a reading for a local author, and as we watched the audience engage with the story, I felt a surge of gratitude. Gratitude not just for the bookstore, not just for Sophie, but for every trial, every betrayal, every heartbreak that had led me here. Without those experiences, I might never have discovered the depth of resilience within myself, or the joy of building a life rooted in purpose and honesty. In June, nearly 3 years after the anniversary, I ran into Laura again, this time completely by chance. She was at a local cafe sipping coffee alone. I paused for a moment studying her. She looked different, calmer perhaps, or maybe just more aware of the consequences of her past actions. I approached her, and we exchanged a few polite words. No recrimination, no lingering tension, just acknowledgement, she said quietly. I've been trying to rebuild too. I nodded. I hope you find what you're looking for. It was almost surreal. No drama, no explosions, no final confrontation. Just life moving on, quietly and deliberately. After she left, I realized that this quiet acceptance, this ability to acknowledge the past without being consumed by it, was the real resolution. The revenge, the exposure, the heartbreak, all of it had served its purpose. But the transformation, the rebuilding, the creation of a life filled with authenticity, connection, and purpose, that was the ultimate victory. By July, the bookstore had launched a summer reading initiative for local schools, and Sophie and I were planning a photography exhibit featuring local talent. Our lives were full, not just busy, full in a way that mattered, and yet the lessons lingered. I had learned that betrayal doesn't define you. That revenge can provide a temporary sense of justice, but not lasting peace. That the real power lies in reclaiming your life, building something meaningful, and choosing who and what deserves your energy. On one particularly quiet evening, I sat in the bookstore office, sunlight streaming through the front windows, Bailey curled up at my feet, Sophie setting up a display nearby. I looked at the framed magazine article on the wall, the photo book on my shelf, now a relic of the past, and the stack of letters I had written to myself during the early months of recovery. I thought about Laura, about Aaron, about the man I had been when my world collapsed, and I realized that all of it, the heartbreak, the anger, the revenge, the rebuilding, had been necessary. Each piece had shaped me, hardened me, and ultimately allowed me to create a life that wasn't defined by anyone else's choices. By the end of that day, I understood that the resolution wasn't a single event, a dramatic confrontation or a final act of revenge. The resolution was the quiet knowledge that I had survived, that I had learned, that I had built something real, that I had turned the tables not by tearing someone down, but by rising up. I still remembered the feeling of seeing her at the restaurant, the shock and disbelief etched on her face when she saw the photo book. That memory was no longer a source of anger or satisfaction. It was simply a reminder of how far I had come. And as I watched Sophie organize the last of the photography prints, Bailey yawning lazily at my feet, sunlight catching dust motes in the air, I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt whole,